What is up, my friends? This is the Protect Your Neck podcast, and I am your host, Dan Tom. Analysts' work you can find over at MMA Junkie as well as the ActionNetwork.com. But on this here program, the Protect Your Neck podcast, we break down high-level MMA. That's what we're going to do here tonight. Whenever you listen to this, although it will be in a slightly different way, it's going to be a top 5 show. Of course, going to be bringing in a special guest co-host, Bill Welker, in just a little bit later. You can check the timestamps to jump ahead. Bill had a hard out today, so we just wanted to focus the time I did have with him on the soup du jour, the topic at hand, which is top 5 middleweight fights in MMA. That's what we're going to be breaking down here today. But before that, just some housekeeping stuff that I'm going to be doing solo. Figured I'll squeeze in last week's results. So if you're listening to this audio or video, hello, in the future, this will be a bit of a time-stamped episode. In a sense, I don't usually do that for the top 5s, but again, trying to combine it here with a recap. At the very least, maybe my lazy ass will, not lazy, I don't know why I gotta say that about myself. I actually work really hard. I've been working really freaking hard. 17-week stretch, of course, we just finished, and maybe I'll put this part on the recap section of the YouTube. But yeah, audio listeners, for sure, you'll get this as one big holiday here. You can, of course, as per usual, check the timestamps if you're listening on iTunes. Of course, 5-star ratings and reviews are really helpful. Could use another fresh batch of those. Going to go and read those. Not so much on this one, but maybe on a future one. May try and read the Amazon and on it. On it doesn't provide a list, but Amazon doesn't tell me what you buy, folks. Don't worry if you want to have a David Carradine one night in Bangkok, get the karate gi, the vibrating nunchucks, whatever you do to get your knocks off. It won't give me any of your personal information if you click through the Amazon link. That's on mixedmartialanalyst.com. I get that wrong later on in this program because I just forget everything and I'm terrible. I don't know my own stuff. But yes, of course, this program, the Protect Your Neck podcast, hosted by my website, mixedmartialanalyst.com. You scroll down, maybe even toggle to the right if you're on the mobile, and you will see an Amazon click-through. If you shop at either of those two things, all you do is click the link. You're at the website, and you do your normal shopping as you would, and at no extra penny, a small percentage of your purchase or whatever you purchase will be kicked back to this here podcast, which is greatly appreciated. Of course, if you want to give something straight up to the podcast, not that I deserve it, though it is a free podcast and has been so since, over half a decade or so. I don't know, 7 years. I don't know what we're going on here, but it will continue to be free, although it doesn't come without a cost of some pennies, which come out of me. So if you want to help out, that's a secure PayPal link. Dan Tom MMA, I believe, is the address on there. We'll have this here face on there. Of course, you can find it on my link trees if you see me at Dan Tom MMA, which I have right here as my pen points to it for the visual listeners. Maybe throw some little underscores between the Dan and the Tom and the MMA to find me on Instagram. And on all those social profiles and the link trees, you will also see the link for direct link to the PayPal. So you can also go about it that way if you care to do so. I'll probably roll those up, just do some housekeeping on those. I do have results pulled up. We're going to go over results for Bellator 299 and UFC Vegas 79. And then we will turn it over to the top 5, which is a really good one, man. It's a really good trip down memory lane. I think you guys are really going to dig that. So real quick, as I pull something up here. Bada bing, bada boom. Of course, I did not have this part of it pulled up. But yeah, I'm going to pull up the Amazon people who click through. Just give you guys thank yous. While I do that, I want to give some shouts out. Listener of the pod, trading partner, my guy Danny V, Richard. Really good dude. Really good trading partner. Listener of the show. Saw he tagged the show on Instagram, but I'm really bad at checking that account. But thank you, Danny. You're the man. D Love, of course, my guy Dustin. D loves turmeric. Use that underscore trick that I said for my name. Do it for his as well, or you can go right to his website. That is theturmerictonic.com. That's turmeric, TURMERIC. Use code PROTECT15 for 15% off your turmeric order. Word on the street is D-Love just put a fresh batch in, and your boy may have gotten his order in already. So That's the theturmerictonic.com. Excellent mixture, a little bit of lemon and ginger in there, which is great. Does nothing but help the bioavailability there for the inflammation. I'm still dealing with some shoulder nerve issues. Hoping to get back to grappling more than I am, and more importantly, get back to being more consistent in my man Gil Guardado's strength classes. I just my shoulder's been on one, and gonna go get some more therapy done to that today. So the turmeric tonic will definitely supplement the other positive efforts. So I want to shout out my guy D Love there. Of course, Bill Welker will be on the show. We'll shout him. He's at MMA on the Rocks as I pull up a report for the month. Ba-da-ba-boom. This is where I'm like, thank you guys, what's up in the chat? And I usually use that to fill time. But I will say, make sure to hit the like button. I know my stumbling ass may not deserve it now, but I got a good episode coming your guys' way. Well, while that's loading up, let's just jump right to Bellator 299 results, shall we? Ba-da-ba-boom. 6 minutes. Belly. There wasn't much to recap on this one as far as my plays go. I on the podcast I just had the rounds 4 and 5 for Johnny Evelyn. I didn't do the 3, 4, and 5 like Gamrot would have helped me more in this one. But I'm like, you know what? In case it's a decision, which it wasn't, let's go ahead and throw Evelyn in a parlay because you got a bunch of favorites for a Bellator parlay, which did hit. It hit at a an adjusted rate. We had Kieran Clark in there. We had what else do we have? Dara Kelly in there. We had my man Mads Burnell. I'll talk about him in a second in there. Peter Queally and Johnny Evelyn. Of course, Peter Queally injury. Kind of made that one go down, which sucked. Took down the profits, and got me back on my injury soapbox, which we'll talk about. Yes, we finally do have a sample size. Spoiler alert in the UFC headliner fight, but leading up to it, it just seemed like more of the same, essentially for the last 2 years, and then some. As far as again, weird ref stuff, injury stuff, just rearing its head, and let's swallow it through, whatever, fine, we'll take it. Let's get the other legs to cash at least, whatever. Mads Burnell looks awesome against Daniel Weichel, who shouts at Daniel Weichel. The guy's been fighting forever, man. Everyone talks about his competitive fight with Pitbull, the second one, but that first one, he was, that knockdown punch, practically a knockout punch, right? On anybody else especially, lands with any more time in the round. And he's got an impressive win and an impressive title, I believe, to his name, right, Weichel? So it's a really deceptive resume there. But, of course, I'm happy for my guy Mads Burnell there, who I got the Mads Burnell shout on the Contender Series, which was great. Another good Contender Series. I wanted to go this week, and, bummed I didn't. Then I would have actually, attended the 2 best Contender Series of the season and since its start, right? So that would have could have been cool. I missed the next fight between the ladies. I missed Carvalho, Pico, and then of course I tuned in for Eblin and Edwards. And what was this of round 3? Yeah, if I would have played round 3, I would have cashed that one. But I didn't expect him to get the finishes till maybe 4 or 5, which looked on pace to do. I did say Edwards, more of an opportunist, will have his moments and scares, but, that scare turned it into a real scare with that cut. That was a really terrible cut. And I was like, oh, man, again, the injury gods are out for me, right? Come on. Again? Really? And, I don't know if I would say lucky, because Johnny Eblin's good, and it's kind of what you're supposed to do, in that situation. Go out there if the fight's in jeopardy of being stopped. But I definitely got bailed out there. At least in my books. I'll definitely come clean to that one, right? Like, holy crap. Okay, there we go. Because I thought, maybe not. But, again, between the cut in hand and my typical luck with these things, I'm like, oh, they're out to get me, right? They've got the, we've got the perimeter. We've got you surrounded, the MMA gods, right? Like, okay. So that happens, and we end up positive out of Bellator nonetheless. Cool. Again, thank you guys for following me in the Action Network app. And although it was, I got to go check to see if it's back up. Of course, I got to finally get a winning week, and I couldn't get my results shared for whatever reason. It was being glitchy on the night. But those of you follow me there, follow me on Twitter, would have saw the parlay. You follow me on here, of course, and I always let you know that stay tuned for fight day, folks. Not everything is in. All right, where do we end up on that? 10:24. UFC Vegas 79, UFC Fight Night 229, I believe. UFC Fight Night Fiziev Gamrot. We went 4-7 overall, which, people love to hang on to, right? Like, you get a winning night, so your haters are going to be like, oh, you win this much in picks, right? And it's just like, I've showed you guys the nights where I've been, like, on these losing nights, I've been, like, hitting, like, crazy percentages on not just overall picks, main card picks. And yeah, this is all correct. But again, no one cares, and I don't say anything different, by the way. I take it on the chin like I always do. And don't make it up to be anything, if anything, more self-deprecating, like I always am. Yet people still take homage with that and still find the need to burn calories to hate rather than improve their own lives. And all they're pointing out is something that I always point out myself. It's just like, when you look at people who have good betting nights, look at their picks, and the analysis sometimes not even that great. It's just because gambling is gambling, right? And this is a perfect example of that. It was a wild night where most people on the timeline lost their ass off, and even if you didn't, like me, you probably should have, right? And I'm keeping my hand risen here to come clean for those listening audio-wise. And it proves my point that that's how wild and bald how this game is you can have terrible picks, at least from a numbers perspective. I had, terrible picks 4-7. We'll talk about some of those. Again, there's, I may have gotten bailed out at the very end, but there was all the typical hurdles put in place, whether if we're talking about injuries, shifty, arguable scorecards, or arguable / bad referee procedures and protocols that affects the results, right? We definitely had those in play. But yes, of course, the numbers are what they are, and I account for them either way. 4-7 overall. We went 2-2 in straight plays, and those were all underdog plays, so that's good. 1-4 in the round flyers, which, all you need is one, baby, especially the way we play them, right? Round hunting. Hot rounds. Get your hot rounds here. We're actually really lucky to get that hot round. We'll talk about that. We went 1 out of 4 in the round robins, as per usual, which means we went 0-1 in the long shot parlay. Equaled 2.15 units of profit. Not big. Not saying it is. Never said it was. But goddamn, am I allowed to be happy? I mean, and shouldn't I be happy after my losing streak? And again, everybody should be grateful if they were able to get out of that fight, that alive, because it was a wild fight night from a watching perspective, from a betting perspective, from a results perspective, from a protocol / criteria nerd perspective. It was a wild night. So make no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I'm on the winning side of it. I'm going to keep the same energy, folks. I'm going to complain about the same shit that I complain about. Otherwise, people will say that I'm crying. It's just recapping. And it's just me being passionate, because I am, and I'm actually basing it off facts, and actually have committed to the sport. May or may not know what I'm talking about. Fucking, you'll hear me reference rules and history things written by an article later. That it's actually an article that I wrote and published over a half decade ago. Like I might kind of somewhat know what I'm talking about, I guess, if I dare say so. So yeah, but I'm going to keep that same energy as if I lost on some of these things, because again, like I tell you guys, it doesn't matter if the win or lose. Like, there's just certain things that I feel a certain way about, and when it keeps coming up, I'll let y'all know. And yeah, again, everybody should be grateful they had a winning if they were to get out of that one alive. So I'm not gonna sit here and be like, I'm a genius. This is what I did right. Take notes like the normal thing. That's not me, folks. So yeah, we got Mateusz Gamrot defeated Fiziev. Of course, this is the one we got bailed out on. This is the first injury where we actually benefit on. Although it does kind of suck, though, because you not only just, from the selfish perspective, again, grateful I got out of it. I'm not trying to, be overly selfish here, just being honest. It's like, yeah, I wanted a chance for the money rounds, right? I also had Gamrot by sub in a round robin, and that would have paid big. That would have made for a possibly an even bigger night. There's that, and for the analysis part where it was like, people are going to be like, it was an injury, and Fiziev technically had, it's like, oh well, you can say what you want, but Fiziev was winning that fight. That's a fact, bro. Fiziev was winning the fight. That's a fact. Like, well, you know what else is a fact? My cashed Gamrot ticket, if we want to fucking play that game. And I'm not going to play that game. I was a respectful winner on the night. I'm not going to change that energy now. But if for people that want to go, that's a fact, bro. To 10-9, round 1, that's a fact. Like, I don't know. It's a fact that I got to go to the ticket and cash. I got money in my pocket, and Gamrot has a W on his record. That is also a fact. I would argue facts that trump your facts. And secondly, what's more annoying on the analysis part, because again, that's not my prerogative, that's just my response for anybody that wants to play that game. The analysis part having nothing to do with the results as far as betting goes, the analysis nerd in me, that was the call. For Z, even whether you were picking Gamrot or not, you knew that his hardest rounds were going to be early, and Fiziev's best rounds were going to be early. This should not be a surprise. This should not be something we are crying about. If you want to cry about the result and us being robbed of a fight, sure, that's fine. That's normal. But what's also normal is that Fiziev was always going to win these early rounds, right? Unless he did something really stupid or an injury happened. Not just round 1, but round 2 was going to be Fiziev's, in the 90 percentile, in my opinion. Now, Gamrot still has a way to win these rounds with judges somehow. I mean, you want to talk about an alternate history with this guy, right? Holy crap. He's definitely got that. So, it's so weird. It's weird not doing these live right now. I'm expecting like the boom, boom chat going on right now. But shouts to all the normal chatters that would be. You can make up for it, by the way, chatters. Hit me up in the comments. It'll help with the video population and all that stuff. And engagement and all that shit. I'm trying to, God forbid, do it like the normal way somewhat. But, anyways, it happens how it happens. And I hope Fiziev's not out, for too long. Probably going to be a 12-month thing. We'll see. I wish him the best. And we'll see what happens with Gamrot. I think he's... it's funny. Again, it's matchup dependent. This is what it has nothing to do... Everybody was picking... And that's why I wanted to see it play out, because this felt like just classic recency bias. I felt like the spread was right, but you could it shouldn't have been wider than it was, but you could argue it could have been flipped around. It's a tight fight. I'm not making a big statement there. You could argue it could have been flipped around. But there's a lot of recency bias against Gamrot, which I am also with, but it doesn't matter how we scored the last fights. It doesn't matter how the last fights. This is a brand new fight. Each fight, it's style versus style. And the ironic part about Gamrot is, even though I am still not a fan of his, despite him finally cashing a ticket for me, as fluky as it was, I think stylistically, he's got some of the best chances against Makhachev, and I hate to say it, against Oliveira. Now, does that mean I'm going to pick Gamrot against either of those? Probably not. But odds-wise, man, they post some stupid odds on there. We're looking at dog or pass, because Gamrot, stylistically, it's what styles does he match up with. That's how you really should approach every matchup. That's how I approach every matchup, to be honest. But especially guys like Gamrot and the biases that are being thrown around. All right, next fight. This one really could have swung. Bryce Mitchell defeated Dan Ige. Unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. Most people have round 3 for Bryce unanimously, and then it's just mainly arguing, what is it, rounds 1 and 2, right, for Ige. And it's kind of silly. It's if you're going to give Ige round 1, I believe you have to give him round 2, even though Mitchell, his grappling was more effective in round 2 in the fact of submission attempts. Because I know he's got like kind of a garbage attempt, and then he's got not really a garbage attempt. He's like, even the commentators know, like, he's a little too high on the tricep, the head and arm. It's not really there, but he holds it, and he deserves a catch again. I'm Mr. Submission Catch. Score the catch. I'm keeping that same energy here. I did score that for Bryce. The catch for Bryce. But if I'm allowed to score, which I wasn't, because I obviously had a bet on this fight and stated bias on this fight outside of the betting, some things that most people don't do one of. I'm doing both consistently, which sucks, because there actually is an argument for the guy that I was on, which And thankfully, other people were making it, whether they had money on the fight or not. I saw plenty on both sides, especially people who were, aware of the criteria, have done the work, are actually licensed judges, even like the Eric McGrackens of the world and my colleagues of that sort. Other colleagues a bit dismissive about Ige's chances, which was kind of surprising. And again, could have gone either way, but even other colleagues who were very criteria friendly, not mentioning the fact of the damage, was like, although I will shout out the Couchside judges, they did bring up an excellent point that I was going to bring up myself, and again, it would sound like it was biased for myself, but obviously Scott and Dan, like that's their thing. Shout out their podcast, I always do. So I feel very confident citing those guys because they don't have all the gambling bias and all the bullshit that is a part of my world here. But even those guys said, even though they scored it for Mitchell, they did say, like, if we're going to score round 1 for Ige and not give him round 2, I mean, even if the submission catch they thought, or others, or the judges who are actually important, right, not me or your opinion, thought that the submission catch was not just closer than I gave it credence to and the broadcast booth full of professionals gave it credence to, let's just say, at the same time, okay, if that is more effective or as effective as, someone not me would think, or not the broadcast booth full of former world champions would think, they actually had to bring the doctor in. Not only was the damage bad, again, when I was given that thing where if you don't see the damage, you can't score it, right? Sometimes you don't get a clean view. Maybe their back's to you, you see a left hook and they back away, and then there's a cut on their right eye, which corresponds with the left hook they just threw, but you weren't sure if it landed. Well, I guess it landed, right? Especially if there was no close, boom, bumps in the pocket. That could have caused it. There wasn't... not that there wasn't throughout the fight, because they end up, clashing and grappling. But as far as the damage that Ige was scoring in the beginnings of round 1 and 2, were really, really clear from clean punches. And it was such clean punches that I feel like Ige came in with the right game plan with the straight punches, classic, Nick Sick counter wrestling strike selection. But once he landed his patent left hook, I think it was done. I think Ige just kind of started seeing that, and I think the straight punches and the body punches, I'd have to go back and watch, started lightening up, right? And I think, and I've heard people cite that happened in the fight, and I think that's why it happened. I think it's because he was having so much success in those early rounds. And again, back to the Couchside judges' point, if we want to talk about what's more effective, Ige's punches or Mitchell's sub-attempt for ending the fight, like, they actually had to bring the doctor in, right? Like, the cut wasn't new. It was accumulating. It wasn't like, oh, we got a fresh cut here. I got to see where it's coming from, right? Where they do that whole thing, where they're reacting to it. No, this was like actual eye swelling around the eye, redness, bruising, cutting. Like, literally every checkbox of details was going on with that fucking eye. And they had to bring the doctor in. So, again, for what that's worth, not that that's an end-all, be-all, just like, a 10-8 to a 10-9 round. The barometer, like, let's say Aljo, Peter Yan, like, oh, how close was the ref to stopping the fight was the argument for the 10-8 in round 2, right? At least that's definitely how I felt live, at least. I don't know how I felt on rewatch. I'd have to go rewatch it again. But you get what I'm saying, and we've talked about that. We talked about that specifically in the judging seminar, where they're not instructed to use that. I get that it can be a part of it, but they're not instructed to use that, because that leads them down to being the rabbit hole of being the ref, and that's not. No, you're judging what you're seeing. The damage is taking place between the two fighters. Do not worry about the ref. So I don't know if that made sense or not, but yeah, again, if we're, people were like, Dan, Mr. Criteria guy, even though I don't consider myself that, but I'll take it as respect if it's like, these listeners and stuff, or like, shout out to my guy like Wes from the MMA Analysis podcast. I was like, I hear your frustrations. I feel the same way. Like, I don't feel like it's consistent in cases like these, I would have loved to have these judges for, my fucking, Ketlin Vieira and Yana Kunitskaya fight, which is another similar dynamic, except the damage is at the end of the round, so maybe there's that end of the round bias, right? Where you have much more passes and submission attempts from Ketlin Vieira, had better control, better passes, and better submission attempts on Yana Kunitskaya than Bryce Mitchell had on Ige. Didn't get the fight. So yeah, so if again you incorporate this and what we're gonna get into, it just felt like more of the same luck with the old Dan Tom. I'm like, come on, can we get this one close decision? And with Dan Ige, even though it was a 1-unit money line, I also had him in a round robin where we had a plus 500 cash, right? So you incorporate both those things. It's it's over. It's between $500 and a grand swing on that fight. So that was oof. Shouts out to Dan though, no excuses. Acknowledging the corrections, acknowledging his opponent. Shout out to Eric, even though he had a right to think he was up 2-0. He did the right thing by saying, we need this next round. So that's all you can do. Marina Rodriguez defeated Michelle Waterson Gomez. Mom champ, yeah. Okay, so my voice is gone from doing brace your ears for the Chevello in the next section, folks. But I don't know. This one we got lucky to cash round 2. We had the round 3, and at a certain point, let's just get us to round 3, which we may have if Waterson got the takedown, but she didn't, and fell to mount, and at that point took enough damage because round 1, let's be honest, was a 10-7. I was really proud of all my friends, whether it was my Criteria Nerd colleagues, to analysts, to gamblers, alike, citing the 10-7. And again, the separating language, which is what they're going to change, unfortunately, although they have a substitute for it, which I'm fine with, I guess, but was, and I get why they changed it, but when the separator, they say overwhelming damage, and I'm like, people have hard enough time deciding between a 9 and an 8, and the 9s are already big enough with too wide of a latitude. Now we're going to use literally the same language, just be like, oh, overwhelming. Oh yeah, the 3Ds, but like overwhelming now. We're just going to add overwhelming. That is not a good separator. Anybody, language specialist to dummy, could tell you that. What was a good separator is having something like when a stoppage is warranted. Now, they don't want that because it kind of throws the ref under the bus, and I get that. The refs already have a hard enough job. And again, back to a stoppage being warranted, well, that's the referee's a sole arbiter, not the judge. Judge is not trained. It's 2 different training courses, right? It's 2 different jobs. Judging also is hard enough. Do we really want them to be taking on the hardest, arguably one of the hardest of them all, reffing? No, we don't. We want them just worrying about judging what's in front of them. So, per Mark Goddard, although this is one of those unofficial ones that hasn't been officially stopped, but they are moving to do so, it's going to be when a stoppage is imminent. And again, that qualifies here too because it seemed real imminent. Like, it seemed like the bus was fucking late multiple times. And again, this was, Kerry Hatley, and I was like, in defense, I was like, one of my round props that really burned me, what was it, the Jimmy Flick and Charles, not Charles Jourdain, Charles Johnson, right? I had Johnson round 2, that was the prop, and he stops it early. And it wasn't so much the early stoppage, and I had a bet, but it was also, and not that this made me feel better because I felt terrible, and even with my bet, I was like, God, poor Michelle. But to my point, the reason why I was so upset is because this is actually more normal to Kerry Hatley officiating. Now, Kerry Hatley is one of the better officials in general because he does also judging. He is in Texas where they allow you to not just both do judging and reffing, but on the same event. And he has actually done that a lot of times and hasn't had issues on either side. I want to give him that respect. That being said, I will say Kerry Kumite Hatley. He lets he's got a bit of that Yamasaki in him. I don't know if it's because it's Texas. That's how they do in Texas. They're tougher. Everything is. I don't know if everything's bigger in Texas. Everything's tougher in Texas. It seems like, and that's something I've said many a time. So for what that's worth, not saying it's right, but I'm saying that there's an observation I've had for a minute in my defense, and in my defense, I haven't had that observation for no reason. Case in point here, I'll take the round 2. I'll miss the round robin round 3 and have Michelle Waterson still alive, hopefully. Brian Battle defeated AJ Fletcher. One of in the untracked round robin I was at one house on because I was still getting everything sorted. I did get set up. Shout out to my guy Martin. I did end up getting set up, and what you guys saw was the final. But in case I couldn't get set up there, I did the same thing at that other house from the other week. But again, they only let you do the money line, so I was like, fuck it, let's just do all dogs. And Fletcher was one of them. because I think I ended up like picking him by like a submission round 2, and sure enough, he gets submitted in round 2. Opportunism, baby. But no, opportunism aside, hopefully we do see more Brian Battle skill. Good on him. Wasn't confident in that one. Wasn't too confident in this one, and then ended up taking the shot on Ramos. Because I'm like, you know what? The small cage, superior grappler. I saw Ramos a lot in the gi, so I'm like, oh, Ramos has been working a lot on his wrestling and striking in recent years. Maybe this is the fight, and smartly so. Again, small cage, Charles Jourdain, right? This is the fight where y'all must have forgotten. He reminds of why he was a prospect ever to begin with from the Dana White days, right? Looking for a fight, the first one or whatever, right? It was for his submission prowess, and he's in the gi. I'm like, okay. Well, if anything, maybe he's preparing for that Charles Jourdain guillotine choke, right? And he's gonna apply his strengths on the terrain where it's appropriate. Fuck it, let's go Ramos here. And sure enough, you know what? Ramos doing Ramos things, man. It looks like he got kind of worked past that where he kind of like falls apart and combusts. And nope, he still got that in him, man. He will combust out of nowhere, chased and paid for it. That being said, you still got to give Charles Jourdain credit for the win. You still got to not sleep on him, like I seemingly have. Or maybe just not bet on his fights, because I said Charles Jourdain's close to Volkov territory. Well, maybe he is, man. I can't hit bets on either side of his fights, so maybe I have to put Charles Jourdain in the Volkov no bet territory. Miles Johns defeated Dan Argueta. Happy for Johns. Happy for any underdog supporters. I pick Argueta here. I like Argueta as well. I like him a lot, actually. Seems like a cool dude, even though I don't know him. Just as a weird personality, I appreciate that. Maybe the ADD stuff. But, and sympathies to Argueta bettors, because like I said, even though I mistweeted it at first, so hopefully I didn't take it wrong, I wasn't doing the dodge bullet thing. Like, I was like, I probably would have been on him. I may have dodged it, but like I shouldn't have. You know what I'm saying? Like I was like right there. I was trying to find a way to play him. So I feel like I got lucky on that one. I wasn't trying to rub it in anybody's face or anything like that. Tim Means defeated Andre Fialho, baby. Fialho. Round 3. Props to anybody who took Means round 3. Part of me thought about it, but I'm like, no, this fight's going to be wild. Let me just go kick for coverage, go Means money line, and I'll just go Means KO. Shouts to Prop Squad. I don't know who was that. Was it Tony Satori that hit that shot? I'm not sure. Someone in the Prop Squad hit Means by KO, and thank you. I tailed that for the round robin, which was the one leg that did hit. Of course, Gamrot by sub was the other. Rodriguez round 3, not meant to be, and neither was Dan Ige. So started out hitting the first leg, which seemed nice, right? And then the unofficial round robin, we actually started out hitting that leg too. That was Rendon, despite officially picking Vidal, just because, again, WMA underdog, just like the week before, right, picking Nelson on that thing, even though I didn't pick Nelson officially. Again, I'm at a place where it's only going to let me round robin. You might as well do dogs, and then if you're going to do dogs, you might as well only go to the live ones at that point, or who you deem to be live. Cody Brundage defeated Jacob Malkoun. I didn't watch this, but sympathies to all Malkoun bettors again. Everyone's recap of it was like obvious. He deserved the point, or he deserved it, but people were arguing should have been no contest or this or that. The way they interpreted it, the protocol seemed fine. I didn't watch this live, but I did see a replay. Shout out to my guy Fanyo tweeted, and usually, it had the slow mo in there, and usually the slow mo makes things worse or makes the case the opposite way. But in this case, it made it a little more sympathetic. When I saw it clipped out of context from the whole fight. And it looked like, it looked like he was going to turn to deep half in or turn all the way out. And I would say maybe 60-40 to 75-25% of the time, most guys are going to turn inward, especially in MMA, because it'll limit the legal targets. When you swim in for a single, you only show the back of your head. You're not giving up your back for a choke, right? So in MMA, it's more sense, and in general, you could argue it's more times they're going to turn in which case the elbow, I believe, wouldn't have been illegal, but I believe he turns out. Either way, it's a last-minute turn while the elbow goes down. And, it looked like Malkoun might have got a raw deal, which means Malkoun bettors probably got a raw deal. I did see people the outliers who were on the Brundage seemed to be, humble and they knew what they got away with. So I guess more just sympathies to the Malkoun bettors there. Mo Usman defeated Jake Collier. I had Collier in that round robin. So I guess you could say I had money on him, even though it was unofficial. But I will say, that round robin wouldn't have cashed, and Collier wouldn't have mattered as far as Collier hitting anyways, so it really didn't matter. But I do think this was the wrong call here, or they should have taken a point. Again, I say it all the time. It's not intent, it's impact. I've been saying it for years and years. Only recently have they been seem like it's been catching on, and unfortunately hasn't caught on to the right people. All the referees, of course, I believe that was Big Dan in there, and Big Dan always has this attitude like. I feel like Big Dan has, and I get it, you should feel anxiety, you're in there reffing, but I feel like Big Dan has more anxiety than the fighters themselves, like Kevin Holland or some fighters, they just want you to smile, they want the fist bump for that sense of security, right? They talk about certain fighters need that. Like, I think Big Dan needs that. That's why he hates trash talk so much. Like, people are like, oh, he's racist, he gets on, only these fighters for trash talk. Like, I'm not going to go, I'm like, I don't know about that. I'm not going to pretend to know, Big Dan, and much less throw around those kind of accusations. But what I will say is where I think that comes from is that he likes everybody getting along in there because he's so damn anxious. And he's like, oh, come on, whoa, 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 whoa. And, he kind of has that, and I talk about that, referees that kind of have that anxiousness, minus maybe Jason Herzog, who I don't think is anxious, but I could see maybe interpreted because he's so fleet of foot. But you see referees with that anxiousness. Mark Smith's another guy who gets a lot of criticism, right? He also has that. He's got like some of the best eyes you'll have a human being can have because he's a fighter pilot. And I forget that Jimmy Crute stoppage on the Contender Series is one of the best referee stoppages I've ever seen in my life. And it's a Mark Smith stoppage to his credit. But he also has a lot of that jitteriness too. So there could be, I'm not saying it is. I'm not pretending to fucking know. But there could be a correlation there, right? And Big Dan kind of has a lot of that too, where he's just like... it's okay. It's fine. Hey, he didn't mean it. He didn't mean it. He didn't mean it. Like, Dan, you're not being a bouncer right now trying to make good. Like, no one's trying to get at the other guy. Like, I know you're just trying to keep the peace or whatever, but, like, you are the peacekeeper. You're Big Dan. You're the sole arbiter. You're the referee. You need to level the playing field as you see fit. It's not about intent. It's impact. And if they would have taken a point, even though there was still a 37-27 floated out there for Mo Usman, would have been a majority draw, and you call your bettors who bet him straight up, which was not me, but you guys would have gotten a push that you should have gotten because that clearly affected the fight. Even though you could say that Jay Collier probably would have faded out anyways. Again, we don't know that, right? We don't know. Anybody saying, and I'm happy to cash the Gamrot ticket. I wanted to see if my analysis was right, yes. But I'm not sitting here and saying, oh, Gamrot was going to win anyways. No, we don't know what was going to happen. We don't know. That's why I was pushing back on people going, oh, Fiziev got round one. Like, who cares? He was going to win round one anyways. We don't know what's going to happen. We were cheated at that. Don't pretend like we don't. Mizuki Inoue defeated Hannah Goldie. Didn't watch that one, but good for Mizuki. And then Rendon defeated Vidal. Didn't watch that one, but I was like, oh, sweet. The biggest dog of that, like, untracked for funsies round robin I took off the counter. Cashed. And again, for people getting mad, like once you post that one or whatever, to be honest, I calculated it. I literally doubled, and I usually do way better off the counter anyways, like I always do. But again, those are my just for funsies off untracked on the counter bets. Like those are getting put in after all my other bets are put in, or at the very end, like on fight day. Or on Friday, which is still after I've recorded and podcast and given out my main plays and so on and so forth. And again, for what it's worth, I could have done that after the fact. I would have been more than happy to post that losing ticket because I would have posted my winning tickets as well. Like I do whenever I post a winning ticket, I post the associated losing tickets on the fight. Like I'm not, going to take, 2 or 3 shots on a fight and only cash to show you the one that wins. Like, no, I'll show you everything. And even when I have a winning night, I'm not going to sit here and brag about it. I'll sit here and tell you about my losing nights for sure untracked because it's untracked. I can't brag about that shit. But for what it's worth, 420 dog, plus 420 there. So there ain't no tears there. Fucking dumbasses coming at me. Good call, dummy. Like it was just. I'm sorry. It was I felt really good about this card before it happened, and you just had like a bunch of haters rolling in, going like, "Oh, this ain't it. Oh, thanks for the fades." And I'll make that joke myself. That's fine, And if you're friends with me, you want to make that joke, that's fine. Or if you're not friends with me and you just want to be funny, at least be fucking funny. That's what I always say. I'm actually really hard to offend. Just be funny. If you're gonna be an asshole, when I've spent the majority of this year just taking shit from assholes, having every bad beat and no credit for the good analysis, but every bad beat in tow. You're going to come at me before... and the funny thing, they always cry. They go, why are you getting mad at me? Like, because you're an asshole who I don't know. And whether you follow me or not, like, why are you burning the calories just to be an asshole? You're not even being funny. You are talking shit before the results are in. You are being proven wrong on said results. And you're getting called out for it. I don't know what's so hard to understand about that. Mess with the fucking bull. So yeah, I don't care. It wasn't a big winning night. It was a fucking winning night. So that was really nice. Winning night for Bellator. Winning night for Vegas. Shouts are done. All right. On that beat, let's take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to be breaking down with Billy Welker's top 5 middleweight fights in MMA right here on the Protect Your Neck podcast. And we're back right here on the Protect Your Neck podcast for the top 5 middleweight fights in MMA with special guest co-host Bill Welker. Of course, we are going in a bit of a different order, although you will be not to your listeners, knowing so much, but we should be flowing right now. Of course, we are at the topic that you're reading at the top of your list there. It is the top 5 middleweight MMA fights. And of course, for these top 5 shows, I got to get a guest co-host, one, to kind of save you guys from, being berated by my voice over and over again. We'll get some different perspectives in here, which is also why we do the listener list, which we'll also get to. Keep an eye out for those. Make sure you're following the show on all social platforms, or at least, some of the main ones, at the PYN podcast, of course. Thank you for liking and subscribing here at Dan Tom MMA is where you can find me, where I also will share these things so you guys can kind of weigh in on your list. But of course, I got my co-host, a man I've done shows with before, here, there. I've seen him off screen, in the flesh. I know he's real. He's a good dude. He's one of my favorite dudes in this space. You might know him as at MMA on the Rocks because he does Technique, Drinks, his own podcast where he talks about the action. Bill Welker, what's up, Bill?
What's going on, Dan? Thanks for asking me to do this. I've been really excited about it because I'm not like you. I don't go back and watch a whole lot of tape because there's so much MMA going on. I pretty much stay with the current stuff. But when you asked me to do this, it had me staying up late, going back and watching old fights, having nostalgia. And I'm really excited to talk about these middleweight fights. So it's going to be a good time.
Absolutely, man. And again, you're obviously, even though you don't have much time to go back, who does? I'm surprised that, if we both weren't so active in doing what we do on the socials and our kind of extracurriculars, our hobbies, kind of melding these passions, which is what I appreciate about you. You're able to kind of find a way to meld many. I'm still trying my best with this one here, but it's one that we both kind of agree on, and we've talked about off air. I didn't want to talk about it off air today because, I wanted to save it for the pod, but just for the listeners, Bill, who don't know you like I do, can you just give us kind of a quick history of you in relation to your MMA fandom, your experience? Obviously, you're not just a fan or, a guy who makes you actually can wrestle, can strike, can teach these things. Where the hell did this all start for you, for those who aren't familiar with you?
Let's see. It depends how deep you want to go. Do you want to start with my childhood trauma or...
That's where it starts for most MMA people, to be honest, if we're being,
Yeah, and, you and I have had discussions about this as well. I mean, you don't get into this sort of stuff, training and otherwise. There's a few rare exceptions, but there are certain things that come up in life that drive you towards this lifestyle, and I think that's why we feel such a connection with other people who are involved in it. But yeah, the long and the short of it is I started martial arts around age 7, Japanese jiu-jitsu, and then started wrestling around age 10, which was almost 30 years ago. And then it just kind of progressed from there. I got into jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai, and now I teach jiu-jitsu and I teach Muay Thai. And I'm mostly just a fan. I have competed and things like that before, but I don't really consider myself a competitor. I'm more on the coaching side now, definitely at my age. And just a fan of the sport.
Well, Bill's very humble. He's been in it for a minute. He is trained and worked with names you guys are probably familiar and have seen on the screen, but he's too humble to tell you that. And I hope to get a chance to train with Billy down in South Florida or Florida. I don't want to give too much of the locations away, but hopefully maybe we'll see that us two reunited. Except on his side of things, of course, I've seen Bill when he's down here in Vegas, so hopefully we can make that happen, Bill.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's an open door policy for you, my man. And I'm just outside of Tampa, Florida. So yeah, we're a hotbed for MMA here. I teach Muay Thai at MJM Muay Thai City of Tong in Clearwater. So, anybody who's listening that's in the area or visiting, definitely welcome to come in and train and, tell them they heard me on the podcast or whatever. And we welcome in everybody to come in and train.
Absolutely fantastic. And without, continuing down this road where we would give too much away, like our ages and whatnot, safe to say, me and Bill Welker, and it'll be, to be honest, the good thing about these top fives, especially these, if it's a topic that stretches as far as MMA time continuum goes, you'll kind of out yourself, right? As kind of like what kind of a fan you are, who you're a fan of, what kind of fights you're a fan of, what time period you were, most nostalgic to you. I think a lot of these things come out in these lists. Without giving too much away, we're going to get into it shortly, soon here. 2-4, obviously. But Bill, did you experience some of that putting together your list? Or were you like, wow, my biases of fandom are pretty clear here? Or how did it go for you without giving too much away?
Yeah, absolutely. And it almost got to the point where it was a little overwhelming to pick top 5 fights. So I kind of molded the list into more of my favorite middleweight fights because
good.
You and I went back and forth and I kept asking questions and I'm like, is it middleweight or is it 185? Because middleweight and Pride was 205. And so I wanted to pick some Pride fights, but technically their welterweight was 183. So it was like, I'm like such a literal guy. I didn't want to go outside of that. And then, like, as far as the best fights for MMA should have a little bit of everything. Good grappling exchanges, back and forth, shouldn't be too one-sided. But then I kept coming back to, with my list anyway, I don't know if you had this experience, I kept coming back to the most memorable finishes.
Yeah.
Not necessarily fights that went the distance and were good, like, back and forth scraps. The finishes are what we all remember. The punches and the kicks and the storytelling of the fight is great in the moment, but at the end of the day, the finish is what really burns the memory, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm glad you did that. I didn't specify too much because I want it to be open to interpretation. Like if we did, and there is no right way, but if I would say there's a right way, I'd say you went about it the right way by leaning toward your favorites without even knowing your list, Bill. We don't know each other's list, by the way, folks. You guys know that. It's a live reaction. But the thing is, if we do top 5, it's so subjective, and there's already so much arguing. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like arguing the best is what everybody does on a daily, no matter what the topic is on the internet, and that's not really fun to me, right? Everybody's
sure.
Like, and because it's arguing pretty much about the same names, and at a certain point, are you even really behind that? Are you just saying it because it's And I had to question that with my list. Like, is this on here because? And I have some of those where you could say it, but it's also just great fights, and we'll get to those. But it's like, is this on here just because it's like, I'll get crucified if it's not, because this is like known as one of the, widely referred to, And you're having that question because you want it to be genuinely yours, and you're like, or am I putting this on this list because I genuinely liked it? It genuinely struck me, and I like these a lot. I encourage listeners, you can tie it. I told Bill, like, even if it's like, I do gambling stuff, but this is obviously not a gambling specific topic. This is a general topic. But yes, if you have like a live story, maybe involves a ticket or not gambling, but it just involves a funny live story, like shout out to my guy Jordan Killian, who was the only person somehow to pick Ryan Bader over Tito Ortiz over, like, it was like he was in a bar, of a Buffalo Wild Wings full of a bunch of bros and casuals who were they still thought Tito was the man, even though he was on this 5-fight losing streak. My guy Jordan's these idiots have no idea what's coming, and he was thought he was the smartest guy because he was going against them all, saying picking Bader. Of course, you get the big upset. That creates a crazy memory, right? It's already a crazy memory of a fight in its own. But sometimes you folks, you might have your own personal story that gives it steroids, and that's totally okay to use that as a qualifier here. So to introduce the topic, because Bill touched on it with Pride, of course this is middleweight fights. Of course we're going mainly by the traditional ABC, the ABC ruling, if you will, which was based, of course, the New Jersey Athletics Control Board. A lot of these rules, even though they are being updated, even though they need to and will be updated, right? Whether we're talking about the rules of the weight classes of MMA, they are pretty much all established by the new, what we're working on as of this recording, right? Kind of semi-evergreen. We're not to timestamp too much, but we're in 2023. About 22 years ago in 2001, the New Jersey Athletic State Control Board kind of took charge of regulation, which UFC ran toward, which they love to pat themselves on the back, but really it was because right before that, the years before that, during the McCain, kind of that McCain era, if you will, leading that charge was the UFC was actually lost contracts and wasn't lost promotional deals, able to broadcast in, I believe, 36 states. So that kind of definitely encouraged them to run toward regulation. So I believe this is about UFC, and I'm going to read off something, but the good thing is I've been doing this so long, I'm actually cribbing off my own words from an article I put out about half a decade ago. I consider myself a newbie, but in my defense, I kind of know what I'm talking about, and in my defense, there's too much to memorize, so even I have to go back and look at my notes. But yes, basically, yes. So these political pressures forced the UFC to cooperate with state athletic commissions, which eventually gave way to the first weight class separation being rolled out at UFC 12, classifying all fighters 200 pounds and heavier as heavyweights, while competitors 199 pounds lighter were considered lightweight. So folks, if you want to follow at home, just go to Tito Ortiz Tapology, click the details, and scroll all the way down, because you'll see his first fight, not his second fight with Guy Metzger that headlined one of the UFC 30s, but if you go down to, he was actually in a tournament, I believe, back at UFC, so let's go look at this, right? Let's go look at UFC 13, a Battle of Bourne or something, some weird name it was called. But you will see Tito Ortiz classified as a lightweight, which is hilarious, right? Because that's what the division was considered. Now, continuing reading from an article that I published for the history of, it's actually history of lightweight division, I'm reading off MMAJunkie.com that I myself wrote. By UFC 14, the promotion renamed their lighter division middleweight. Although the lightweight moniker made its return at UFC 16, it now represented all competitors who weighed 170 pounds and lighter. So again, if you just go look at Tito Ortiz, a couple UFC fights later, you will see him now classified as a middleweight. But the weight that he's competing in is always the same. It's 199 pounds, which does get moved to 205 pounds. So right now they're actually matched up with what Pride is doing, right? If we're looking, we're in a history machine, and getting a little bit of feedback from your end, Bill, and my ears. I don't know if it's going on the recording. If you want to check that. And,
yeah, there's a little bit of lag.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Well, it'll smooth out. I don't hear it anymore. We're good. But yeah, so basically, Tito's listed as 199 pounds. Pride is following suit at this time, right? And then of course, sorry, not 2001. It's 2000. The New Jersey Athletic State Board takes charge of regulation. But in 2001, it's not officially seen into the UFC, which the first fight is at UFC 31. That's where we first start seeing the rules and weight classes as we know today. So if you guys kind of were following my jumbledness, little pinpoint marks to make yourself sound smart, UFC 31 is the first time we see weight classes and rules and regulations rolled out, right? So now we have 205 pounds for light heavyweight and everything, so on and so forth. So it's a little tricky. I mean, if you want to get cheeky, you want to, I don't think any of those earlier fights that were classified as lightweight, like Guy Metzger-Ortiz, is really going to be on our list here for me or Bill. But if you wanted to get cheeky and consider those middleweights, you could. Of course, from this point on, outside of Pride and later won championships, pretty much middleweight is universally 170 to 185. Again, Pride did their middleweight and they considered it essentially 205ers, right? So it was different there. One championship, whether it's because of the Asian thing or just because of their non-weight cut practices, they end up following in the same category as far as classifications there for how they do their middleweight. So one championship's they call their middleweights essentially what we know as light heavyweights. And of course, the other outlier, as it is another Japanese promotion. They go the opposite way, and of course that is I believe Shuto here, who I usually always make a thing. Theirs is their middleweight is actually 155 to 170 pounds. So what we know as welterweights, Shuto has traditionally considered middleweight. Now again, I don't think that's going to affect either me or Bill's list, I dare say. But just to give you guys a quick, that's the basic history there of middleweight division and the weight classes in MMA, what we're working with for our selections. There we go. The more you know graphic just flashed across the screen. There we go. Pretty cool stuff, right? Anything to add to that, Bill, before we get into our selections here?
No, but I wouldn't mind if they brought back that old rule where under 199 was lightweight, because then I could be a lightweight again.
I know, right? I'm actually sitting at lightweight right now. I'd be feeling good at sitting in the low 190s, but right now I'm struggling just to walk around in the middleweight limit is probably where I should be walking around in. But I don't. We'll see about that, Bill. We'll see about that. I'm doing my best over here. But yeah, no, it's cool. You know, it's a weight class that kind of gets shit on by analysts like myself. Because we love the lighter weight classes. The sport has grown so much, but there is so much history in these bigger weight classes, and we're going to touch on some of that here. So again, this is our top 5. It's not the top 5. We're not claiming to have the best top 5. We're not claiming it should be your top 5. You have your top 5, and if you submitted your list at the PYN podcast, we will read it on the show. But first, we're going to go like a tennis match from 5 to 1. There probably will be crossover, especially considering me and Bill's similarities, our fandoms, our age, so on and so forth. So don't be surprised, but it's okay. It's expected. We'll work our way down to number 1. We'll clean up with honorable mentions and listener lists at the end. Are we good to go, Bill?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
All right. So for your number 5, my number 5 tends to be kind of a hipster spot. I guess you could say it was in this case. Number 5 is always a really interesting spot for me. What ended up being your number 5?
So, like I said, I did a lot of back and forth with this and like what to include. Greatest middleweight fights. I decided to make it my list, and obviously I have more personal experiences with some fights than other people. And then there are times like maybe a great fight happens and you're not in the best place in your life, so it just doesn't hit, or it doesn't register, it doesn't hit that emotional chord. So I'm gonna give you one that I can almost guarantee is not on your list, because this is one that's very personal to me.
Nice.
So about 8 years ago to the day, I had the opportunity to go to Japan. And my 2 brother-in-laws live in Japan. They live in Nagoya. And scheduled the trip just around my wife and I's birthday, just to go visit her family. It so happened that the first weekend we were there was a UFC fight night at the Saitama Super Arena, which is where they held countless Pride events. So I was like, obviously we're going. It was headlined by Josh Barnett and Roy Nelson. So this was UFC Fight Night 75.
Wow.
A surreal experience. It was amazing just being in that building and being able to experience UFC fights with the Japanese crowd was just a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And the stars just aligned for me to be in that building that night. It was a totally different fight experience than going to fights here in the States, which I've done many times, from amateur all the way up to the UFC. They schedule it to air prime time in the States. So the prelim started at maybe like 8 a.m. in Japan. So we're in there in the dark, and and throwing some beers back, enjoying the fights, whatever the case. And then we get outside and it's 2 p.m. We're like jet lagged. We don't know. We're so discombobulated, but it was an amazing experience. There was a middleweight fight on that card. It was between Gegard Mousasi and Uriah Hall. It was the first time they fought. Now, to set the stage a little bit, Gegard kind of had a home field advantage here because he had come from Pride. That's where he kind of made his name, as you well know. I mean, I don't have to condescend to you, Dan, and I'm sure not to your listeners either, but I just want to make sure I'm giving the full background here. So Gegard was a Pride guy. He was huge in Japan. And Uriah was kind of, even though he was big coming off The Ultimate Fighter and he was very flashy and everything, he was kind of expected to lose this fight. The first round was a back and forth grappling exchange in which Uriah Hall actually, locked up a few submissions and was able to sweep Gegard. He went for a leg lock at some point. The grappling exchanges were super technical, and of course everyone would expect Gegard Mousasi to be the superior grappler. But Uriah Hall's no slouch on the ground, man. He's held his own against some really high-level grapplers in there without getting submitted. In any case, it still kind of looked like the fight was going to go Gegard's way. It looked like rounds 2 and 3 were going to be more of the same, where Gegard would strike his way into a takedown, hold Uriah Hall down. Second round starts, and not too long into it, Uriah Hall hits a spinning, flying back kick into the face of Gegard Mousasi, follows it up with a flying knee, and then gets him up against the cage and finishes him. And just being there and hearing the Japanese crowd and the way they appreciate fights is so different than the way we do here. The crowd is dead silent unless something happens. Like at one point, Gegard passed to side control, and you hear like golf claps going off throughout the arena. Like they know he improved his position there. But even that crowd, as docile as they were and as polite and respectful, that place went crazy when Uriah Hall knocked out Gegard because it was such a spectacular knockout. So this one had to make my list because I had such a personal experience with it, and all the circumstances leading up to it. Uriah was not supposed to win that fight. He was not winning that fight, and then just pulled one out of a hat in typical Uriah Hall fashion.
Man, that's a great shout. I gotta say, rat shit in Calcutta for the MMA Analysis podcast. I'll explain that. That's a great shout. That was one of the first fights that I broke down on my website that got me started on doing this, mixedmartialanalyst.com. In fact, if you go to that hosts this here program where you can find the aforementioned on and Amazon click-throughs and the PayPal donation link if you feel so inclined that I mentioned in the previous portion of the show, folks. You go to the breakdown section, and not only was that some of the early breakdowns, so I don't encourage you to do too much reading. Definitely not good. Definitely not good. You think my writing is bad now. But the cool thing about that, and like UFC Fight Night 77 as well had it, is I have drop-down menus, I believe, on every fight. Where not only I would do the in-depth, now it's just like I do the in-depth for the main card, Bill, and I do some like quick picks for the main card. And then before that, I used to just do the main card in-depth. This is back in the day where I gave the in-depth treatment to every fight on the card. And you kind of could, even though it was the Fox era where they were amid their uptick of scheduling. It wasn't as bananas as it is now, not the timestamp, but the reason why we're doing this top 5 show with Bill here is because I finally got a break after a 17-week stretch of fights, folks. Week after week. That includes Road to UFC. That doesn't even include Road to UFC, The Ultimate Fighter, Dana White Contender Series, or anything else of PFL or Bellator, or anything else that has all happened in said time. International Fight Week. ABC Reffing and Judging Conference that your boy went and passed all courses. All that happened in this last 17 weeks, and that's not even including stuff outside of the sport, which we're not talking about, but it's been a crazy run, right? And you go back to this time period, we're still in that uptick, but man, we're we still have big names. You know, it's under the UFC banner, but we're getting like, you know, Pride era guys like Barnett. They're still actually, you know, they're still amongst their international expansion era. The UFC is, right, where they're trying to get to different places and visit in turn historical places like Saitama. That's crazy. You got to go to that. I'm so jealous, Bill. I mean, even just being able to go, you know, after the fact because of the history. That's just super cool. And yeah, I remember this card very well. For the rat shit in Calcutta thing, people are like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" This is another podcast lore. But again, back to there are certain funny stories, and I always shout my friends on the MMA Analysis podcast, and you'll hear them say rat shit in Calcutta whenever somebody is so sure about a pick or a bet. And that tracks all the way back to this fight, Bill, that Bill mentioned, because I think it was Sean Carey, who's no longer on that program. He said, if Gegard Mousasi loses to Uriah Hall, I don't care how much Uriah Hall knockout power has. If Gegard Mousasi loses to Uriah Hall, he said, "I'll eat rat shit in Calcutta." And sure enough, that happened. And even though not only did they not let him live it down, Bill, that gentleman is no longer on the podcast, but that is still a reference that holds strong to this day because of that fight. And even though that's
did
not
he do it?
No, I don't think so. Maybe, you know, there are stories depending on who you ask. But the point is that fight has an effect, and it triggers a lot of memories for a lot of people. So that's a great shout. That yeah, you're right. It's not on my list. I wouldn't have thought of it, but it's a great pick.
Yeah, that's one. It's definitely resonated with me ever since. And of course, they rematched and it went a little different. But man, it was a special fight for me, especially like when you see fights in the States, like the crowd erupts and the crowd boos, and it's nonstop noise pretty much. But in Japan, where everything's so quiet and respectful until something happens, it like really hits you in the feels, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one. My number 5 is, I guess, kind of similar. Where it's I don't know how great the fight is up until the finish, right? But it's a finish that you don't expect. Maybe not as cool for style points, although it earns a lot of style points. We'll talk about it. And perhaps a comeback. Like, my middleweight fight list almost started turning into, like, this could be, like, easily, like, a top 5 comeback list, you know? Which I had to be careful of. And maybe made some adjustments. This one, though, did not... It almost didn't make the cut, but it did. And that is Kung Lee versus Scott Smith 1. Strikeforce Evolution. 2009 was a great year for MMA. We had UFC 100 that year. And about, 5 months later... And 5 months and 5 days later, we get, or something of that sort, we get Strikeforce Evolution. And Kung Lee makes his return. He's undefeated at this time. He was doing movies. He stepped away and relinquished his belt. But he was still undefeated. He was a traditional martial arts guy, San Shao. And he, combined it with some MMA stuff. Was a San Jose guy, of course. Strikeforce. Scott Coker was a San Jose promotion. Mm-hmm. So... And people unaware that even though it wasn't necessarily deserved, Kung Lee was a guy in talks of, like, maybe this guy could beat Anderson Silva. This is the mythical guy outside the UFC. You would see, like, thumbnails of Anderson versus Kung on forums. Like, it wasn't uncommon. It sounds extra silly today. And even then, even as a gullible fan then, I was a bit skeptical. But this is what it was, right? This is the kind of aura Kung Lee had at the time. And he was a big favorite coming in. Again, it was set up for him to win. Even the promotion, they're like, oh, he's set up to return to his home to San Jose, a typical San Jose homecoming, And just like Clay Guida did to Josh Thompson earlier in the Strikeforce career, where they tried to do this and it backfired for, even though this one wasn't for a title and that one was. This one actually technically wasn't for a title because, again, he relinquished his title. This was the gimme fight to get him back into that title fight, right? And round 1 starts, and it looks like that, like he's dropping them with some of my favorite spin kicks as a southpaw, where you start off with the body threats, the body kicks, and then when they start backing up from the body, you can either go to the head, which he does, and then when they start just getting out of dodge, they don't want body or head game, right? Then you can kind of attach a missed head or left power body kick to a stepping spin right kick. And if you are a right-handed southpaw or a right-footed southpaw, that's quietly your stronger kick. And you get to kick with your right side whilst still striking the liver side, which is great, right? Spinning side kick against a orthodox fighter, right? You're going to be hit with the right. You're going to be hitting the liver side, right? And it sure enough hits that liver side. Scott Smith gets hits to the head. He's pretty much a punching bag for all the kicks in the books for about 2.5 rounds. Now, he does have instances of pressure. His corner had all the right things, but it's ultimately up to the fighter, right? They're telling you how to beat this type of fighter. It's pressure, it's relentless pace and durability, and Scott Smith does show that, but he has a really hard time showing that. Up until about round two or round three, in the middle of round three, he finally starts listening to his corner, who's calling for a really smart combination. Now, usually the typical, even till today, which is impressive, because this is like over a decade ago, right? Even today, you don't hear corners yelling their fighter to throw a left hook against a southpaw. They're like, or to jab. They're like, no, right hands, power kick, get to the lead hand side, and that's it. It's the same thing. Outside foot awareness, throw your power side, and those things aren't wrong. They do conjunct with one another, but you can strike with your foot in the lead without it being in the outside position. You can effectively strike. Not only can you effectively strike, but you can effectively strike with your lead hand doing so, whether it be by jabs to the head, jabs to the body, which set up hooks to the head regardless of the stance. But if you do want to take the outside stance, and if you do want to forget that your jab exists, which you can forgive, especially to MMA fighters a decade ago, one thing you could do is you can feint the right hand, throw it away, and set up that left hook. Because feinting the right hand will not only draw out the defense, it'll give you an excuse to step your foot in that preferred position that your trainers were likely training you to get to, that outside foot position. And now you've got a real devastating left hook, right? Or a la Luke Rockhold Bisping, where they do it for you, and Rockhold jabs, but he jabs a little too far on the inside. And then it gave Bisping that perfect left hooking lane, which he took the title in their rematch, right? And not to spoil that fight in case that's on anybody's lists, but that's the same left hook principle, and Scott Smith hits it beautifully. We get the left hook finish. It's just one of the most beautiful comebacks. I know as a fight as a whole, you can argue maybe this doesn't deserve to be on there, but if we're talking about your top fives, this is one that I vividly remember. It's in the peak of my MMA fandom. It's just one of those beautiful Strikeforce moments, and it makes my list at number 5.
And yeah, I definitely remember the aura of Kung Lee that you're talking about. And because Anderson Silva was so good that you almost had to come up with these mythical people out there that could beat him, because he seemed like pretty much untouchable. I have a great segue here, because my number 4
let's go,
happens to involve one of the same people. Not technically speaking one of the greatest, the place in my life that I was at and where I watched it, and the ending really makes it. This is, in my opinion, one of the top endings to an MMA fight ever in any weight class. Also involves Scott Smith and Pete Dragosel. It was at the Ultimate Fighter 4 finale. These two had become buddies on the show. And throughout this fight, they're punching the shit out of each other. And then they would stop an exchange and like high five in the middle of it, which, is kind of taboo now to even like high five or like the hug at the beginning of the round. But this was something different. This was something I feel like we haven't seen before or since. These were two buddies in there that were just having a blast fighting, and they wanted to high five each other, and it worked. And of course, this would all build up to the crescendo of the finish, which was Pete Sell landing a nasty hook to the ribs of Scott Smith. And Scott Smith is falling backwards. Pete Sell rushes in to finish, and then right at the last second, Scott Smith catches him coming in with a hook and just puts him out. And then it probably could have been a double TKO if the ref had been back a little bit further, because Scott Smith couldn't continue. But it ends up being a knockout win for Scott Smith. both of these guys were coming off the Ultimate Fighter. They had become friends on there, and they went into the fight as friends. They fought as friends, and they were friendly after the fact. And the finish was one of the most bizarre things. I remember I was in college when this happened, and we would all get together. My buddy Andrew, who really got me into MMA a little bit. I used to watch casually, but then really got me into it in college. He used to organize once a week. We would go up to like the penthouse of the dorm and watch The Ultimate Fighter every week. And this was the comeback season, which was one of my favorite seasons, probably my favorite, next to season 1, of course, which is like the pinnacle of the show. Right. So we watched the comeback series, which featured guys like that. Of course, that would be the season that Matt Serra would win at welterweight and challenge George St. Pierre for, arguably the biggest upset in MMA history, according to a lot of people. But I just have so many fond memories of watching the Ultimate Fighter, and it was such a different thing because before that show, you were just watching these savages in there. You don't know where they came from or their background. They would do little interviews and things like that, but you didn't get this in-depth and see like what their day-to-day interaction was like. And here you saw it was so different at the time. These two guys were like, they were like college buddies, like we all were at the time. Like my buddies and I, and I wrestled club in college, and we had that same kind of camaraderie and ball breaking, and we would love throwing each other around. So it was interesting to see that kind of reflected in guys that were in the UFC. They were at the highest level, and then we all got together to watch the finale, and we had the same reaction as everybody, like, what the fuck did we just see? We just saw a guy like get finished with a body shot, and then he comes back. It's like that video of the old man. It was like, call an ambulance, but not for me, and he pulls the gun out.
Yep.
That's what Scott Smith did to Pete Sell, and that fight will always have that. No matter how many times I watch it, it will always get an emotional reaction out of me. So that's my number 4.
Dude, that's a great. I'm glad that's a great segue and a great shout. With Scott Smith, it's tough, right? Because that's the other fight that you got to pick from with him, right? As far as his winning fights, Kung Lee won and Pete Sell. Those are like his most memorable wins. And Scott Smith, for those aren't familiar, if you want to see Joaquin Phoenix and like Ben Folks have a kid who does MMA, like that's Scott Smith. Shout out to my guy Ben Folks. But he always looked like Joaquin Phoenix, I thought. Kind of like, less of a doppelganger. So I always had to use the caveat, hit by a semi-truck first. But like Forrest Griffin looked like Josh Hartnett, took a bunch of steroids, got hit by a semi-truck, and then did MMA. I have to use that qualifier for Forrest there, right? He's a little... But but yeah, like I love it, man. And even like Scott Smith's like losses, like his fights, Robbie Lawler or like Paul Daly, like this guy, like no matter what, was always in memorable ones. And that Pete Sell one was great because but there was that dynamic. And I love that you said it probably could have been called a double stoppage, because if you go back and watch, folks, like it's hilarious. Like there was maybe even one punch, if that, left in Scott Smith, and he gets the knockout because he's doubled over in pain. Just to show you the effectiveness of body shots, that he won the fight, but he had the more lasting pain. Because again, folks, body shots. I'm not saying it to be an annoying a nerd or contrarian here. Like people who fight know those things are brutal, and that's what made it all the more impressive that Scott Smith even was able to get a punch off.
For sure.
So that was a great number 4. I'm gonna go to my number 4. I don't think there's really a segue there. It is not as older UFC, though probably older UFC to a lot of people, which is making me feel old, Bill. But this is one of the best cards ever. We were excited for, at least, and ended up paying off as a great card. UFC 116. I believe that was headlined by Carwin and Lesnar, right? I think that was the one Rogan was like getting everybody pumped up. He was calling it like White Gorilla Festival or something. That was like his unofficial name. I think you had like Matt Brown versus like Chris Lytle. Like you had some crazy fights on there. Correct me. I don't even have it in front of me. I'm just going off memory.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think I know what fight you're gonna choose.
Absolutely, and it's funny, kind of apropos, not to timestamp too much, but this fighter actually recently just took his first UFC judging assignment, which is hilarious. And that is Chris Lieben, who was coming off of a win off of Aaron A-Train Simpson, which was not going to be a fight you would associate Chris Lieben as winning. Aaron Simpson might not be a big name to you guys, but he was probably about as high stock as his name was going to get at this point of his time when he fought Chris Lieben. He was a wrestler. One of the more popular vegan fighters. I don't know if he stayed vegan. I'm not a vegan guy. I'm not like fist bumping in the air, but for you vegans out there, you can fist bump that. There you go. He was favored to win that fight, I believe. Whereas Chris Lieben, we thought we saw maybe the best of him from Tough. He was the brawler guy. It wasn't so much the cardio, but just he would get hurt, and he was either going to knock you out, you're going to knock him out. But he went through, but I think this is the best part of Chris Lieben's career, though. And we didn't quite know it. He moved to Hawaii, which was like, he wasn't training with BJ Penn. He was in Oahu on a different island. He kind of had his own camp. You're like, what's going on there? But he actually, despite, still having his battles with substances as he did, right? He was in the best shape of his career around this point. And he sets one of the records for, I believe someone else might have broken it or challenged to break it. Chaz Skelly may have tied this record, which is why I'm a big fan of Chaz Skelly. But this is the first guy to get the UFC turnaround record, right? Because especially back then when they're not... Having a show 2 weeks apart was actually a rarity back then, folks. Now it's a rarity to have a week apart like we're currently living now in 2023. Back then it was a rarity. So to not just have shows within 2 weeks of each other, but to get the same fighter booked was just freaking unheard of. It never happened until this. And Chris Lieben, because he was able to, I'm not even sure if the fight went to decision or what with Aaron Simpson, but he's already in good enough condition. He's already in shape. He ends up taking a fight 2 weeks later to face Yoshihiro Akiyama, who is already stateside training, right? He's actually training in my gym, Extreme Couture. Now, this is kind of a funny little foreshadowing for people who know the end of this fight and how it ends and the method. But I'm training with Neil Melanson, who specializes in triangles at the time and guard fighting. Couture brought him in for the Big Nog camp, right? And he ended up staying there. But when you're a good guard guy, it means you're good at defenses. And sure enough, one of Neil's specialties, even though he's great everywhere and can teach you everywhere, is fighting inside the guard. If you're good at triangles, means you're probably good at reverse engineering them, right? And Neil, just from ground fighting, ground and pound, submission defense, that's his specialty. And I remember seeing Akiyama in the gym, and I was like, oh, shit, Akiyama's training. Hey, Neil, did you work with Akiyama? Is he one of the pros you're working with? Neil worked with Vitor before Anderson and all these things. And Neil goes, and I'm a big Akiyama fan, so I'm not trying to shit on Akiyama, but it's just funny. They call him Sexy Yama, right? And I don't even know if Neil knew about the nickname, or he definitely wouldn't say the nickname, but he kind of had a smirk on his face. Like, he goes, yeah, we tried working together, and Neil's a pretty rough guy to work with, don't get me wrong. He's not meant for everybody. That's kind of why, Vitor probably didn't keep working with him. Vitor's guy needs to be confident. You really got to kind of pamper him in training. Neil's both, verbally and physically. He'll show you what's what.
Sure.
And Akiyama didn't want to work with him, and I'm like, why is that, Neil? And Neil goes, Akiyama was more into cosmetic training, let's just say. And that's a lot of fighters, right? They're into the muscles and this and that. And if you look at this time, Akiyama was a blown-up welterweight. He ended up finishing his career at welterweight, but like a lot of Japanese fighters, they didn't really cut weight. And as we covered in the intro of this, the weight classes facilitated that, right? With the way they kind of called it. So Akiyama was definitely working more on his beach muscles at the time. Really wasn't working on his submission defense, working inside the guard or triangle defense, which probably could have helped him in this fight. Now, you go and watch the fight. It's a really good back-and-forth fight. Akiyama, he's getting this credit, whether it's the promotion putting it on him or him trying to get in favor with the promotion, but he's doing a lot less grappling and more striking, and he's, swinging and banging. He's coming off of a memorable fight that easily could have been on this list, UFC 100, Alan Belcher, fight of the night. Probably gifted a split decision that probably should have went to Belcher, let's be honest. Even at that time, especially under today's scoring criteria time, it definitely should have gone to Belcher. And Akiyama's still doing cool judo throws and stuff. So it's not that he's not trying to take this fight to the ground, but Lieben is showing underrated jiu-jitsu and scrambling all the way through. I forgot how good it was. He's going for guard attacks and parlaying him into turtle stand-ups like he's a Diaz brother. And it's just a crazy war. And Akiyama, may be able to squeeze out another split decision. It looks like it's going to go the distance somehow. And Lieben just snatches up a triangle. And it's just insane. It's just classic Chris Lieben looking like an insane madman. He calls out Vanderlei Silva, which is a fight that would happen later. And if you go watch Fight Pass, like you watch Lieben leaving, it's like it reminds me of that Chris Barnett where he's chugging the beers. It's like such a classic moment. And Chris Lieben, there's no music playing. And he's still singing the music that he came out to, which was the Red Hot Chili Peppers, My Love Is Like, My Life Is Like a Roller Coaster, Baby. And he's literally singing that as he's walking out. He's just on a crazy high. Go watch it just for that end of Chris Lieben singing to himself, leaving the cage. It is Chris Lieben personified. Do you remember this fight, Bill? Anything to say on this one?
I do remember it, and this is the first sort of overlap we've had because this is on my honorable mentions.
Nice.
But I'm glad it was on your list instead of mine because you had the personal touch to add to it with the Neil Melanson detail, which is a really cool story. And yeah, I know a lot of fighters who have been like that, who were more into the cosmetic training, as you put it. But yeah, this was an amazing fight. And it seemed like in the second round, Akiyama was getting the better of Chris Lieben on the feet, which is not the way to beat Chris Lieben. And I think Akiyama kind of made that realization because even though he was giving him fits on the ground, he's like, I'm hitting this guy with everything. And sometimes Lieben would get this kind of dazed look when he got hit. And then it was almost like he turned into this zombie or this otherworldly creature, and he would just be on autopilot and continue fighting. And he was kind of in that state, and he was like kind of in that flow state. So Akiyama was like, fuck, I can't knock him out. Let me put him on the ground. And then, Lieben finishes the fight in the most Chris Lieben way possible, but the most least likely scenario. Like, the come from behind Chris Lieben win was kind of the story of his career, but a win submitting someone off of his back, that's like, who would have, like, if that was a prop bet back then, like, if you could bet specifically, Chris Lieben by triangle.
Oh my God, I wonder what that number was. Back, holy crap.
If you could put odds on that, plus 100,000.
I guarantee you it would have been anywhere from plus 2,600 to plus 3,300 just by the substrate. Like, just something stupid like that because he was underdog, not his... Yeah, against Akiyama, who had the ground advantage. Just insane. The peak of this guy's career for sure. And, Akiyama, win or lose, he put on some fun fights in the UFC, say what you will, so...
Yeah, absolutely. He put on some really fun fights. I mean, the Alan Belcher fight that you mentioned, yeah, for sure.
I'm gonna do an edit of it, by the way, but they ruined. It's one of my favorite walkouts is Alan Belcher versus Akiyama because you have Alan Belcher walking out to Bob Dylan's Hurricane, which is super underrated. And then you have Akiyama doing his time to say goodbye thing, but it's great because it's in a Western audience. And I'm gonna redo it, but it's great because you see the contrast, especially if I do the edit where you edit over the new metal on Fight Pass. But you see Akiyama doing his hand holding thing in the gi, and it's like time to say goodbye. It's like this really emotional song, and it's peak dude, bro. Just bleed crowd, right? So you look at the contrast of the crowd, like you see how insecure all the dudes are. Like they don't know what to do with the song playing and men holding hands. So they just start like looking at the camera uncomfortably and flexing like, yeah. And it totally opposites the contrast of like this Japanese MMA, stoic, emotional warrior saying goodbye. And it's with the backdrop of just MMA, Coors Light, beer, dude, bro. Like, it is the two most MMA energies, but also the two most opposite MMA energies, and it's in one picture. It's beautiful, if that makes sense.
It's awesome. Sounds great.
Yeah, let's continue. Number 3 for Billy.
Okay. So this one is nothing original, but I had to include it. Again, I kind of like... I always have like a special thing for fights when I can remember exactly where I was watching them and like what was going on in my life at the time. For this one, I was on vacation in the Adirondacks, which is upstate New York, pretty remote, like up in the mountains. And I was freaking out about how I was going to be able to watch this pay-per-view. And it was UFC 117.
Woo!
And, yeah, I had to watch it. So I wound up being able to order it wherever I was staying, some cabin or something at a relative of actually my ex-wife, and we wound up being able to order the pay-per-view. And I remember just being on the edge of my seat the entire fight for Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen, the first meeting. And a lot of people remember this fight as, well, Chael held him down for 4.5 rounds, and then Anderson pulls a triangle out of his ass. But what a lot of people don't remember is Chael in the first round puts Anderson on his ass with a punch and lays him out. And that was kind of what started the avalanche to where he was able to control him. And Anderson was kind of out of it from that point. And I really don't think people give Chael Sonnen enough credit. You know, a lot of people remember him like, oh, he was just a wrestler. He was just like, he would just lay on people. And, you know, also being remembered for when he would get to the big fights, he would get caught in a submission. And he would talk about that later on, how he would kind of like visualize himself getting submitted, like especially in triangles. Mm-hmm. And this is relatable to me because coming from wrestling, when I first started doing jiu-jitsu, it's like, man, I was getting triangled by even like the people with the shortest legs in the room, because of the way you're used to posturing on the ground, you're not used to worrying about it. You know, where you're putting your head, you're just trying to hold somebody down. You're not used to somebody trying to strangle you with their legs. So this was relatable for me, and I was on the edge of my seat because, like we talked about earlier, Anderson Silva had this aura, man. It's like, who is going to beat this guy? And not only did Chael come close, but he put him down with a strike. You know, here's this guy who, he's just a wrestler, lays him out with a punch. And Chael always throughout his career had very clean boxing.
Yep.
I think he really doesn't get enough credit for that. So I'll say it again. And then, you know, held him down, just beat him pillar to post until the very last second when Anderson Silva, you know, throws up that triangle. And, you know, a segue from your last pick, it was like the last ditch triangle, you know, the Hail Mary. And, you know, you could argue the fact that Chael let himself be put into it because of that, you know, self-fulfilling prophecy he kind of put himself into by visualizing it. And, you know, he was that close to becoming a world champion, but it would set the stage for the rematch. And like some of Chael's best trash talk, the Anderson Silva, you absolutely suck.
Sure.
You know, came from that, and Chael being interviewed and saying, oh, I thought like if I tapped out, that meant he won that round.
Yeah.
People not knowing how to deal with Chael's deadpan sarcasm. So that fight would set the stage for a lot of that, which, you know, I was a big fan of. As
right.
much as I like to say now, if you listen to my podcast, I'm always talking about how like, all the antics these guys do, it's just noise to me. I was a total mark for Chael Sonnen's gimmick because I loved the fact that people didn't get it and would get so riled up by it.
Yeah,
take
sure.
it seriously. I thought it was fantastic, and nobody's been able to completely duplicate it. I mean, some people have tried, like Colby Covington has kind of, you know,
right.
stumbled his way through trying to be a replica of Chael, but nobody will ever be able to duplicate it. And I feel like a lot of that character was developed in this fight. So
I agree.
That's why this one made my list. A lot of people would make their list because Anderson Silva got the upset. For me, it was, you know, the development of Chael's kind of character that really made this memorable.
Absolutely. 2009 to 2010, we get some great MMA. This falls right in there. It happens on August 7th, 2010, on my birthday. So, of course, this fight's extra special to me. You always remember the birthday fights. And I'm like, I'm getting this fight on my birthday. I'm glad you mentioned it, Bill, because it probably would have been my number 1 or 2. It'll probably be my number 2 on my MMA Junkie version of this list. But I put it on so many number 1s / so many lists just because, like, I did my Anderson Silva list. It's my number 1 there. It's my favorite fight because it happens on my birthday. It's a comeback. And more reasons than that, than the comeback, than the birthday, than this or that. You're right. Chael Sonnen, just like Randy Couture, they're wrestlers, Team Quest guys, but both Sonnen and Couture had underrated boxing because they worked on their boxing, not just during their MMA. Like both Randy and Chael actually did boxing competitions before they ever fought MMA, which people don't realize. Like Randy did it in the military. Chael actually did some Golden Glove stuff. And Chael is a southpaw. If you're a southpaw and have boxing fundamentals, that'll take you very far. And southpaws hate facing other southpaws. And what do I say? I said it with the Grasso-Shevchenko fight when people were breaking down those exchanges, trying to say, oh, well, what's better punch, the left or the check hook? I'm like, no, they're both great punches. But when you are in a southpaw versus southpaw matchup, both those punches, particularly the left cross lane, is stupid potent. You will throw it and you will have it thrown on you. It'll feel like the first time you've ever thrown a cross before because you feel so dumb throwing it in that stance pairing. And defensively, it'll be like the first time you've ever seen that cross coming at you before because you will feel so dumb defensively in that stance pairing. And not taking anything away from Chael's underrated boxing, but you couple that with his underrated boxing, and he's actually knocking down Anderson multiple times. Very underrated trash talk. One of my favorite promos is leading up to that, actually, is he goes, I acknowledge that Anderson is a great fighter, but I am the best. And I love that line. It is such, they use it for a promo. Underrated. One of the best.
Yeah.
I put him over Connor, over Colby easily. Give me Chael for that, especially in this era. Anything else to say on this one before we jump to number 3?
I would say in any era, but yeah.
In any era, yes.
No, go ahead.
Number 3, we're going to try to speed this one up. I want to get Bill out of here on time, but I ended up going with a kind of a typical one here, but it's good. It's kind of like a two-way tie. It's like, okay, so Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero 2 will probably end up on this list because number 3 spot, because it's just a crazy fight. Now, it's weird because story-wise, I actually like the story of number 1 better. But if we're talking about rematch, it might end up on, like, top 5 rematch fights as well. It's such a crazy rematch. It goes back and forth. Maybe the lack of a finish might ruin it for some. Maybe the scoring might ruin it for some, though I would argue that Whittaker does do enough to earn back his 9 in what could be a 10-8 round in round 3. And you can still argue, if there is an argument for a 10-8, I think that argument should come in round 5. But Yoel Romero does not do himself any credit by letting off the gas for the last of the round, as Yoel Romero does. However, as my shirt would tell you, Alex Poatan-Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 1 is probably, if I'm being honest with me, even though I try to steer away from recency bias, this is kind of a closer fight to when we were recording this, even though it was over a year ago. But that fight has the 5th round finish. It has the history. We got some weird grappling going back and forth. Some round swings, and just one of the greatest, and I know I would pick Poatan, and I did bet him, so that definitely helped, but I'm a big Poatan fan. I'm not an Izzy hater. I'm just a big Poatan fan, and seeing him get that round 5 finish, Poatan, remember himself screaming, hearing Anik's call, we had a very classic boxing call, down goes Adesanya, down goes the champion. We get that moment in MMA right there, thanks to Anik. And it's so perfect. I know it's a standing stoppage, but we could really use more of those. We could really use more towel throws, which maybe we'll talk about in a future selection of mine. But I'm sorry for the kind of a cheating two-way tie here, but telling you'll probably see Whittaker Romero 2 on this list as far as the Junkie Top 5 list goes. But personally, my number 3 is Pereira Adesanya 1. Anything on either of those? Sorry if I sunk some battleships.
No. You didn't, actually. Those are both great fights, and just a little anecdote on the Pereira fight. I won money on that fight because I prop bet Pereira by 5th round knockout.
What?
Yeah, and I'm not the gambling guy. Oof. I'll always say,
yeah, sure.
Anytime I say on my show, if you want gambling advice, you go see Dan Tom. Don't come to me. I don't have a lot of gambling stories. I don't bet on a lot of fights. So right. I probably told you this. I put like $200 on a bookie site, I don't know, 4 years ago, and I've gone up and down with it.
Right.
I've gone up to, I don't know, maybe $500 in there, and I've gone as low as $50. I think there's like $100 or so left in there, but that's the extent of my gambling with MMA. I just do it to kind of play around, but that bet was my biggest win ever. I think it was like a couple $100 I won off of that one.
Oh my gosh, I bet. Yeah,
I don't have a lot of gambling stories, but that's one of them, and it has to do with that fight.
That's awesome.
Let's see. Okay.
Number two?
Segue here. I have one of the same fighters
All right.
involved in your pick, and that's Adesanya.
All right.
So this one for me, it was an interesting one for me to put on this list because a lot of my other picks I had like real emotional connections to the fights because of where I was and time of my life and things like that. This one I didn't. This one I just thought was an awesome fight or a really fun fight, and that was Kelvin Gastelum and Israel Adesanya, UFC
Nice.
236.
Perfect.
I was watching the fight in my backyard. It was the first time I had ever set up a projector screen in my yard. I ordered the pay-per-view, had a bunch of buddies over. My buddy Steamroller Frivola was fighting on the prelims against Jalen Turner, and he comes up with a win there. So we're all on this high. We're having drinks. We're ready to watch the main card. And man, just Gastelum Adesanya. I did not have a dog in this race. I was not particularly a fan of either of them. I wouldn't say I root against either of them either. But this fight, man, I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, and I feel like that's why it's worthy to make my list, because I didn't have any kind of emotional investment in this fight, and it still drew me in with the storytelling of the fight, the way they both had each other rocked. They were both almost finished at one point. Gastelum was supposed to get blown out of the water. He shouldn't have been in there with Adesanya. But Kelvin Gastelum, throughout his career, when he's put in those situations, that's when he shines, man. It's like Chael Sonnen said about him on The Ultimate Fighter, Kelvin, I don't know what you're good at. And then a few weeks later comes back to him, I figured out what you're good at, Kelvin. You're good at winning fights. And he's just like that consummate underdog. And that came out in him. I mean, some kind of dog came out in him in this fight. And it was just such a fun fight to watch. And, not the same emotional connection for me as some of the other fights on my list, but, just a great MMA performance that I would probably show to somebody if they wanted to see, like, what should MMA look like. I would probably reference that fight as one of them.
That's perfect, man. I couldn't say it better myself. It's the same thing. There's no emotional thing, no crazy story. It was just a great fight, and it also ended up in my number 2 slot exactly for that reason. So what a perfect 2-for-1 deal here for the sake of time. But yeah, I really can't add anything more to it. Of course, you also, the only thing I will add is you get that sweet moment going into round 5 as well, where you have Adesanya talking to himself, where he's like, I'm ready to die for this and that. And that was just a classic, man. And if you're a Kelvin Gastelum fan, if you bet on Kelvin Gastelum, you couldn't be any more prouder of your fighter in a loss there, right? That was one of his pinnacles, even though it was a defeat. So nothing to hang his head about. That's also my number 2, UFC 236, April 13th, 2019. All right.
Yeah, man. Kelvin Gastelum's just like the goofy younger brother that's like always fucking up, but you love him.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, come on, man. You missed weight again. Oh, but then you put on this great fight.
Absolutely. Now, for the sake of time here, let's go to number 1. Let's do a Chinese fire drill. I'll lead us off since you sunk my battleship and we both got to do our number 2 at the same time.
Okay.
I'll do my number 1. Maybe it's the same one. Maybe it's different. If it is, it's pretty obscure. But this one, I remember being all over the internet once it happened back in 2010. Again, it's not but a week or two after Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva, right? Like, this is crazy. We're getting insane MMA, right? And we get one of the best rematches between. Their first fight will actually resemble Anderson Silva, Chael Sonnen 1, right? And then they get the rematch about 2 weeks after, and that's George Santiago versus Kazuo Masaki 2 at Sengoku 14. You might recognize George Santiago in all the American Top Team corners. He's one of the main jiu-jitsu coaches. But him, like Conan Silveria, like Mike Brown, like many of their great coaches, were great fighters in their time before then. And you see George Santiago, the bald Brazilian guy with the Arnett-looking sunglasses, with all the trophies in Japan. That was his MO. He was on quite a run. Whereas Masaki, not only did he lose to Santiago in a fight, he was winning and gets 5th round submitted, right, in their first fight. Very Anderson Anderson Silva chael-like. But they get a rematch, and Masaki's coming off this rematch off a loss. Granted, it was maybe a different... Actually, no, it might have been still at middleweight because it was Melvin Manhoff who was fighting at middleweight at the time. But it really didn't matter. Kazuo Masaki was a really underrated guy. Speaking of Pride, right? This guy was a Pride welterweight champion, which meant 185 champion, middleweight champion everywhere else, right? So this was a former Pride welterweight champion. You had George Santiago, who I believe had a cup of coffee fighting for with the Strike, one of the earlier iterations of the Strikeforce belt. Correct me if I'm not, but he is the defending Sengoku champion. Of course, after Pride dissolved, Sengoku is one of those, like Dream. So, it's one of those Asian Japanese promotions that's trying to take the mantle. They're still doing, ground soccer kicks, fights in the ring, very similar to Pride at this time for those folks. And they have a rematch. Of course, Masaki, also known as the Grabaka Hitman. Shout out to Kapoza. If you're wondering where the history of that name, he came from the Grabaka Hitman Gym. Though at this time of this fight, he was actually unaffiliated. He moved away from the Grabaka Hitman Gym at this time. That is Kazuo Masaki. Very underrated fighter. Improved his wrestling and grappling for this fight because he got submitted. But he kind of could do it all. He would work one of the first fighters really, you just see him regularly working the body. Has a really underrated fight with Paul Daly where he finally drops to 170 pounds in Strikeforce at the tail end of his career. It was the last fight of his career. He should have been there the whole time. So he was this really undersized cat. Comes out wearing the black vest. It's just a crazy fight, honestly. Back and forth, they're dropping each other. It's an insane striking match. Then it goes to an insane grappling chess match where they're almost finishing each other. You got Michael Chiavello on the commentary going, "Can he find it? Can he find it? Can he find it? Can he find it?" And like Frank Trick's trying to talk you through the information. You go, "No, he doesn't have the choke here. I don't think he has. Can he find it? No, I don't think he has. Can he find it?" It's great. It is insane. Like even Chiavello and Trigg, who've called fights in Pride and everywhere, they're like, "This is the most insane fight. This is the most insane round." They literally give it the most insane everything they award it, which coming from those men say something. If you have not watched this fight, please go back and watch George Santiago versus Kazuo Masaki 2. It is amazing. That's my number one.
Damn, I wish we didn't switch places now because you had like a history lesson there and recap the fight, impressions of the broadcasters. Sorry. Like, I feel like my number one is going to fall so short in comparison here. That was awesome. I forgot about that one, to be honest with you. So I guess I'm still going to be up late watching fights because of this episode.
Do it.
Because I'm definitely going to go back and give that one another look. My number one is pretty straightforward, and it comes down to the finish again. We're coming full circle here. Time and place where I was in my life, this was a good time. It was like the peak of like me really enjoying MMA and getting into the storytelling. Still pre-podcast by a long shot, actually. But I was still really into it. I was like kind of the guy in my friend group that people would ask, like, "Hey, what's the next fight coming up?" And it was kind of cool to be in that position, which, obviously I find myself in now because everybody at the gym knows I do the podcast and follow along on social media or whatever. I'm kind of like the reference for people. In any case, this was just the build up to the fight, and the way it ended was the perfect storm. It was UFC 100, Dan Henderson, Michael Bisping.
Nice.
There was all the trash talk from Bisping leading up to it, and Dan Henderson just kind of having that Dan Henderson smirk, and just knowing what he was gonna do to him. It's almost like it was scripted to happen on that night. UFC 100 was such a huge event. It was like one of the first really big kind of landmark events that they did. And I remember where I was watching it back in my hometown in New York, and just the finish. And I remember ordering the pay-per-view, rewinding it over and over, the punch, and then the flying forearm that became Dan Henderson's logo at 40-something years old, whatever he was at the time. the guy is just such a legend, and I had a bunch of his fights come up. I mean, obviously he had a lot of epic fights at 205 as well, but when he did fight at 185, the guy was just a wrecking machine everywhere he went. And it's not like you didn't know what he was gonna do. He didn't have any tricks or secrets. It was the right hand, and that's all he needed. And that was all he needed that night. And like I said, it was just the perfect storm. I remember everything leading up to it, and that knowing smile of Dan Henderson, like, I know what I'm gonna do to you. And he turned that smirk into one of the most epic finishes, in my opinion, in the history of the sport. I mean, just probably the cleanest overhand right ever. And then the flying forearm was the icing on the cake. It was just awesome. So when I was kind of like shuffling things around, and I have my list here with things crossed out and numbers and moving everything, I'm like, all right, which one of these got the biggest emotional reaction from me? And I remember like jumping off the couch when this happened, and rewinding the fight, back in the DVR days when you could still rewind a pay-per-view without worrying about ESPN Plus losing your feed.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Like talking about the websites earlier, it's almost like the technology was better back then.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
But yeah, man, that's my number one.
That's a great one.
Rounding it out for me,
dude. That's a great one. I don't know why this skipped my list. I know, as a fight of totality, but like, yeah, you want to talk about reaction. Henderson was my guy coming over from Pride. If we did top 5 light heavyweight fights, my number one would be him knocking out Vanderlei Silva, right? And if you were following from then, you were stoked. He came up short against Anderson. He has the weird fight against like Husamar Palhares. He came up short against Rampage, of course, when he first came. And win or lose, a lot of these were going, decision Dans. So this is Dan Henderson going back to his knockout form for those hardcore fans who follow him from Japan. It was a big payoff there, regardless if you were following Ultimate Fighter, regardless if you hated Bisping. It was huge. And he comes out to Lunatic Fringe, Red Rider, a Vision Quest. Holy shit, that was just I wish he didn't stop coming out to that. That was just perfect Dan Henderson doing the saddle thing where he jumps and slaps his thighs when he gets in the ring. Like, I love me some Dan Henderson, man. One of my favorite fighters ever. Great.
If not my favorite.
Great.
Whenever I try to think about my favorite fighters ever, Dan Henderson's always the first one that comes to mind. That fight with Vanderlei, like you mentioned.
Yep.
Classic.
Yep, Dan Henderson, BJ Penn, and Randy Couture are probably like some of my all-time top 3 fighters, just because they just defied the weight classes. Like they were all undersized dudes. They were all undersized dudes just scrapping with anybody.
Yeah, for sure. And I would put Jens Pulver at the top of mine. He was actually the guy that got me into MMA because as a smaller wrestler, I'm like, man, this guy's a wrestler and he's knocking people dead. Like, this is what I want to do that.
Absolutely.
And like you said, undersized guy too. I mean, he fought at 55 in the beginning. He was the first 55-pound champion, but that was only because there was nothing else.
Yeah.
He didn't have a choice.
Yep. Yeah, he was the bantamweight back to the early things. You'll see him actually fighting for a bantamweight title against Kal Uno, even though it was for 155 pounds. So he was amidst that era as well. I want to get Bill out of here on time. So we just got three listener lists, if you want to comment on those, and then we'll get you out on the honorable mentions if that's cool, Bill.
Let's do it.
All right, first, my guy, of course, friend of the show, Fenyo, at FenyoXSky. Follow him, support his stuff at thefight-site.com. I don't know what order it is, but he's got Whitaker Romero 1. I love that he put 1 on there. Fenyo, I didn't know we were the same in that regard. You also like number 1 better than number 2, which is ultimately what made me bump number 2 from the list, because instead for Pereira Adesanya for me, because it's just like, how can I put that on there if I say that I like number 1 better and yada yada. He has Weidman Machida. We've talked about this one before. That's a very underrated fight. Cutler versus Scott Smith 1. Fenyo, you're a man of my heart. You know my style. Fenyo likes Chris Weidman versus Rockhold. That was a brutal one. One. Adesanya versus Pereira 1. All right, I don't feel crazy there. A nice, solid list, Fenyo. My guy Ghost, of course, another analyst I respect. there. He goes, very obscure that no one remembers, but Akiyama versus Belcher. Of course, I remember that one, but yes, that's a great shout. We talked about that one. And then lastly but not leastly, my guy James Kendrick. Shout out to James Kendrick, who's usually in the chat. Of course, we're not live today, otherwise I'd see you guys here. He has got some weird ones for you, Dan. Akiyama versus Lieben. Not too weird, ended up on my list. Lawler versus Manhoff. I forgot that was a 185 fight. Yeah, that was. Yep, Lawler versus Manhoff. That's an underrated one. I just recently watched that brutal finish, too. I love that finish on that fight. And he doesn't say which one, but he's got Romero versus Whitaker. Again, you can't go wrong with either one there. Any honorable mentions, any comments on those before you get out of here, Bill?
Yes, both. Robbie Lawler and Melvin Manhoff was my number one honorable mention. I had it on my list at one point. Just such a crazy fight. I mean, Melvin was kicking Robbie Lawler's leg into the third row. And then Robbie comes out of nowhere with the knockout punch, knocks him dead. I mean, I love a good comeback. I know you do as well. Yep. So, yeah, that one damn near made my list. That was Strikeforce Miami, I think.
Yes, it was.
Just the name of the...
Good memory.
I think that was the only name of the...
Yeah, yep.
I have the events for pretty much all of these. I was like, man, I'm going on Dan Tom show. I got to do some research here. I got to have my information in order. Another one for me was Chris Lieben and Akiyama, which we already talked about. Another Dan Henderson one, Dan Henderson and Hector Lombard. That was just a crazy fight. Crazy. Dan Henderson finishing it with a head kick. And that one was the only fight in Dan Henderson's career, according to him, that was a personal vendetta. He really wanted to beat the shit out of Hector Lombard because Hector had trained at his gym for a little bit and I guess was an asshole to some of his guys. So, like, as a coach, I can kind of, like, emotionally connect with that one. And Dan Henderson's not a guy who lets emotions get in there. The fact that they did for him, and the only time that they did, he was still able to get a highlight reel knockout. Awesome. I had Anderson Silva, Vitor Belfort on here for the finish. You know, it was just so unique. And then one other one that is just a finish that lives rent free in my head is Chris Lieben and Terry Martin.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah. So Terry Martin was like this stocky middleweight, didn't look like a fighter, but looked like he could fight. Knocked Chris Lieben unconscious on his feet.
Yes.
And Chris Lieben goes into this mode, like I said before, his eyes are gone. He's not conscious, but he marches forward with his eyes hazed over, something like Night of the Living Dead, and starches Terry Martin and puts him out unconscious. And that one...
That lives in my head, too.
I can't remember where I was when I watched it. I know I watched it live, and for that reason I didn't include it on my list. But, man, I think about that one often, especially anytime somebody brings up Chris Lieben. I think of that clip. Oh,
it's classic. You know what I associate that one with as well, and it's different fighters, different ending, but it's similar theme, same time period. And another name, I've not heard that name in a long, long time. Drew McFedries versus Martin Kampmann.
Oh, yeah.
Was that the one where Drew McFedries bashes Martin Kampmann up, and then Martin Kampmann gets the comeback, takes him down, head and arm chokes him?
Yep.
Shows his technical kind of repertoire.
Drew McFedries could crack, man.
Remember that name? Jesus.
Yeah.
Any other honorable mentions? I cut you off there?
The only other one is because of the circumstances where I was and just how unbelievable it was Chris Weidman, Anderson Silva 1.
Sure.
It was like, you know, nobody gave Chris Weidman a chance in that one, I don't think.
Right.
That was one of the biggest upsets ever. And in hindsight, I don't think people give it that credit that they give to like Matt Serra over GSP, but to me it was like almost equivalent. Like nobody thought he was going to beat Anderson Silva, and if they did, they thought he would hold him down, and we knew that, you know, he had ways out of that. Nobody would have thought he would have knocked him out.
Absolutely. That one's got to be burned in your head, especially watching live at that time.
Yeah. And I was watching with a bunch of people who weren't really educated on MMA, but they knew Anderson Silva, and
Right.
that I had friends at that time who would only want to watch when Anderson Silva was fighting, and they were like, "Who's this guy? Tell us a little about him." I'm like, "Oh, he's all-American wrestler. He wrestled at Hofstra, and like he's really good." Well, I don't think he has a chance against this guy though. Like, I mean, whatever Weidman was 10-0 at the time or whatever, like I don't think he has that enough experience, and then it's like, damn. Got to eat my words on that one.
Absolutely. I only have one honorable mention, then we'll get you out of here. I know you got a roll, Bill. This one was mentioned a lot on lists when I did an earlier thing for your favorite middleweight fights. But Rich Franklin versus David Loiseau at UFC 58, USA versus Canada card. That also had BJ Penn versus George St. Pierre 1 back in 06. I went back to watch it. It was a good fight, but not good enough to make the list. Although I will tweet something out that happens in round 4, I believe, at 1 minute and 51 seconds. I watched this like weeks ago, and I still remember that timestamp. I'm going to tweet it out, but Rogan goes, he does one of those slips where he goes, I can't believe they're talking about Rich Franklin. He's one of the first guys. Well, this guy's a teacher. These are well-rounded athletes. These aren't just mindless brawlers. Like they're in that talking point phase. And then Rogan's like, yeah, but if only they got paid like professional athletes for what they give. And Goldie's like, yep. And this is on a UFC broadcast, right? Back then. And then you hear Rogan kind of like go to correct himself. He goes, but don't worry, folks, because I'm sure in a couple years from now, these guys, I guarantee you, will be making as much as other professional athletes in other sports. Watch, just a couple years from now. And I'm like, that was almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It never happened. Only now we're going to court for manipulation. Like, it never happened. The money never came. Newsflash. The money never came, guys. So I'm gonna go clip that out because that's a hilarious fucking... It ages very well.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole other hour and a half on that. But what I loved about going back and watching these fights were the Rogan and Goldie calls.
Sure, yeah, it's great.
I know. Goldberg gets a lot of shit from the hardcore fans.
Sure.
But like I always maintained he was playing it up and kind of asking dumb questions on purpose to kind of like get the conversation going. Like I
agree.
I'll always give him the benefit of the doubt, and I thought he contributed so much to the sport, and his calls on some of these fights that were on this list and otherwise are just awesome and really made the moment too.
Absolutely. I say the same thing. It comes with the territory of that role that's very underrated, and Goldie did that very well. And, say what you will, the nostalgia was great. I mean, say what you will about Rogan, he was way better back in the day, too. So, like, listening to his calls when he was more invested in stuff and, was more of that pros to Joe's kind of voice. Like, it's great stuff, man. It really was peak Rogan and Goldie.
For sure.
All right, Bill, I want to get you out of here. Anything you want to plug on the way out? I appreciate your time, man. This was fun. I'm glad to finally have you back on, and we're going to be talking and hanging more. But anything you want to plug for now?
Hell yeah, man. I appreciate you asking me to do this. Like I said, I was so excited going back and watching these old fights and thinking about these memories. It's like kind of reignited a lot of things for me, especially like thinking about that trip to Japan, which just showed up on my Facebook memories. That was almost 8 years ago to the day.
Yeah, I was going to say September.
It was almost like fate that we were supposed to talk about this, and I'm glad I made the decision to make my list like a little more personal instead of trying to like these are the greatest. Like I would not say these are the greatest middleweight fights, but for me and my experience and my journey throughout being a fan of MMA, these are the 5 that resonate with me. And like I'm sure there's a lot more, and I love the suggestions that the listeners gave as well. I was definitely on the same page with a few of those, like Akiyama and Alan Belcher and Lawler and Manhoff, and I thought there might have been more overlap between you and I until I kind of skewed and tried to make it like, all right, this is like Bill's personal journey. And then I was like, I think we'll avoid the overlap if I do it this way. And it worked out perfect. So yeah, this was a lot of fun. It's I'm at MMA on the Rocks everywhere, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X, sorry. I'm on TikTok now. I caved in and got a TikTok. So I'm on there. I do some MMA training videos. I do some whiskey reviews and post clips of the podcast on there. And then the podcast is MMA on the Rocks everywhere: YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, all that stuff. And then if anybody's ever in the Tampa area, I'm a trainer at MJM Clearwater. We're a City of Tong gym under Mark Delagrati. We're the only City of Tong gym in Florida. I specialize in clinch training. I'm the clinch instructor there. So if you ever want to get some traditional Thai clinch training, come on in, sign a waiver, and come take a class. We welcome in everybody. We have open mats every Saturday. And yeah, we have a very open door policy. So I don't worry about hiding my location from anybody. I'm always welcome people who love mixed martial arts and talking with them and training with them and whatever else, having a drink with them.
All right. Well, I'm going to take you up on the Thai clinch training for sure, man, and come down there and train with you. But please keep up those videos. Please follow Bill. It's awesome stuff. I've been doing less drinking and trying to do less drinking, so that's good for me, I guess. But I still want to live vicariously through Bill here, so I enjoy that. Obviously, I enjoy the technique stuff as well. I got to imagine that's going to be high on your guys' radar. Give him a follow at MMA on the Rocks. Me at Dan Tom MMA, of course. The mixed martial or the mixed martial analyst. Wow, Dan, you forget your show intros, you forget your website, you forget your hosting. That's what hosts this here program, the Protect Your Neck podcast. You can find at the PYM podcast on all social platforms. 5-star ratings and reviews. Give this a like, a thumbs up, please. Appreciate all the engagement. It helps. Positive is better, but all engagement helps. If you want to be shitty about it, you're still helping, I guess. But why not keep it positive? Appreciate you guys, the positive ratings and reviews, the support of the show. Till next time, enjoy your life. Try not to get too caught up in this relentless schedule. Make time to go back and visit the history if you really love MMA, or just do things that make you happy. How about that? But whatever you do, always protect your neck.